History records the Battle of Tinian as a 9-day campaign, but looking at warfare through the lens of a calendar is often a deception. In reality, the fate of nearly 9,000 Japanese defenders on this island was sealed in a solitary, catastrophic window of time. It was not decided by a prolonged siege, nor was it the result of gradual attrition over weeks of grinding combat. The lives of those elite troops were extinguished because of a lone tactical error. A finger pointed at the wrong spot on a map that fed an entire army into the deadliest meat grinder of the Pacific War. How does a fortress island, deemed impregnable by its commanders, collapse so rapidly that even the invading Americans could barely believe their eyes? Today, join Fireline as we decode the Tinian deception, where the art of misdirection, engineering genius, and modern firepower combine to create the cleanest, yet most ruthless victory of World War II. To understand why the slaughter happened so quickly and why the stakes were so high, we must look at the technology that was driving the war strategy in July 1944. The United States had a new weapon, a weapon that could end the war: the B-29 Superfortress. This was the most advanced bomber ever built, a pressurized beast capable of flying higher and faster than anything the Japanese could intercept. But the B-29 was a diva. It was heavy, its engines were prone to overheating, and it required massive, perfectly flat runways to take off when fully loaded with bombs. The Americans had just captured Saipan, but Saipan was rugged, hilly, and difficult to develop. Tinian, lying just 3 miles south across a narrow strait, was different. It was a geological anomaly. Tinian was essentially a flat coral plateau jutting out of the ocean. To the American engineers, it was not just an island. It was a natural, unsinkable aircraft carrier waiting to be paved. If they could seize it, they could build the longest runways in the world and burn the Japanese industrial heartland to the ground. The conquest of Tinian was not just about taking territory. It was a construction project with a deadline. Defending this prize was Colonel Kiyoshi Ogata, commanding a garrison of nearly 9,000 men. Ogata was a capable officer, a realist who knew he was outgunned, but he had geography on his side. Tinian was surrounded by steep coral cliffs rising straight from the ocean, acting as a natural fortress wall. There was only one logical site for a massive amphibious invasion: Tinian Town in the southwest. Conventional military thinking dictated that to land tanks, artillery, and 15,000 men, the Americans had to use those wide southern beaches. It was the only place where the gradient was gentle enough for heavy equipment. Any sane commander would land there. So, Colonel Ogata did the only logical thing. He turned the southern beaches into a kill zone. He laid mines in the shallows, positioned his heaviest coastal artillery to sweep the sand, and most importantly, he massed his elite mobile reserves there, waiting for the Americans to walk into the trap. But Ogata's opponent was General Holland Howlin' Mad Smith. Smith looked at the map and saw the trap. He knew that landing at Tinian Town would be a repeat of the slaughter at Tarawa. Instead of charging into the guns at the south, he looked north. At the northern tip of the island, there were 2 tiny beaches, White Beach 1 and White Beach 2. To call them beaches was generous. They were narrow gaps in the cliffs, totaling less than 200 yards wide. Worse, they were flanked by sharp coral ledges that were impassable for vehicles. It was a logistical nightmare. If the Japanese placed just a few machine guns there, they could hold off an entire division. But Smith gambled on a single psychological insight. He believed Colonel Ogata would never think the Americans were crazy enough to squeeze 15,000 men and heavy armor through a hole that small. However, The geography presented a physical problem that psychology could not solve. Even if the Marines landed at White Beach, the coral cliffs meant that tanks and trucks could not move inland. They would be trapped on the sand, sitting ducks for Japanese mortars. The operation hinged on solving this engineering puzzle. In the weeks before the invasion, CB engineers worked in secret to create a specialized invention known as the Doodlebug. These were portable ramps mounted on the backs of amphibious tractors. The plan was to drive the tractors up to the cliffs, drop the ramps, and allow the Sherman tanks to drive over the obstacles and onto the high ground. It was a daring, MacGyver-style solution, and the entire invasion depended on it, working under fire. The deception began on July 24th. It was a masterpiece of theater designed to kill. A massive American armada appeared off the southern coast at Tinian town. This was not just a visual trick. It was a dangerous operation in itself. The 2nd Marine Division was tasked with the thankless job of being the bait. They lowered their landing craft and made a legitimate approach toward the southern beaches, inviting the Japanese gunners to open fire. This is a detail often overlooked. The men in those decoy boats were not mannequins. They were flesh and blood Marines who had to sit there, taking shrapnel from near misses, enduring the terror of artillery barrages without firing back, all to sell the lie. Watching from his command post, Colonel Ogata saw the armada, saw the landing craft, and saw the splashes of his own artillery bracketing the American boats. He was vindicated. The Americans were coming right where he wanted them. Immediately, Ogata ordered his reserves to rush south. He stripped the northern defenses, committing everything to repel this invasion. He kept his eyes fixed on the southern horizon, convinced that the decisive battle was about to begin. But then the American boats turned around. They did not land. Ogata likely thought they were regrouping for a second wave. He did not know that while he was staring at the south, the real invasion was taking place miles away in the quiet north. The 4th Marine Division was pouring ashore at White Beach with a speed that defied the laws of amphibious warfare. The Doodlebug ramps worked perfectly. As the amphibious tractors hit the coral ledges, the ramps dropped, and Sherman tanks roared up onto the plateau, bypassing the cliffs that Ogata had counted on for protection. There was no resistance, no artillery barrage. By the time Ogata realized he had been duped at noon on July 24th, it was too late. 15,000 Marines, along with tanks and artillery, had already established a secure beachhead. At that moment, Colonel Ogata was cornered. He understood the cold logic of his situation. He could no longer defend passively. If he allowed the Marines to dig in overnight, their superior firepower would pulverize his army. He had lost the advantage of the ground. His only option, his only hope, was to attack. He had to push the Americans back into the sea that very night, or face total annihilation. This desperate necessity to attack is what led to the 6 bloodiest hours in the history of Tinian. As darkness fell on the night of July 24th, the Marines, anticipating the Japanese desperation, dug in. They were not resting. They were preparing a kill box. They set up water-cooled heavy machine guns with interlocking fields of fire, strung barbed wire, and loaded their 37mm anti-tank guns with canister shot. Canister shot essentially turns a cannon into a giant shotgun, spraying hundreds of steel balls capable of shredding infantry formations in seconds. They waited in the dark, listening to the tropical rain. On the other side, Ogata gathered his best units. These were veteran troops, hardened naval infantry, and they were supported by the pride of his garrison, a company of Type 95 Hago light tanks. His plan was a massive Banzai charge, utilizing the cover of night and the sheer weight of numbers to overwhelm the American lines. At 0200 hours, the silence shattered. Thousands of Japanese soldiers surged out of the darkness, screaming and chanting to intimidate the enemy. But the human wave tactics of an older era were about to collide head-on with the technology of modern industrial warfare. The moment the screaming started, U.S. Navy destroyers offshore fired star shells into the sky. Magnesium flares burst overhead, drifting down on parachutes and bathing the battlefield in an eerie, flickering daylight. The Japanese soldiers were no longer cloaked in shadow. They were illuminated targets against the white coral. Then came the tanks. The Japanese Type 95 tanks clattered out of the darkness, their engines whining, trying to break the Marine lines. But in the close quarters of the night, they were hopelessly outmatched. Marines armed with bazookas waited until the tanks were nearly on top of them before firing. The thin armor of the Japanese tanks offered no protection. One by one, they exploded, turning into burning coffins that illuminated the battlefield even further. The infantry slaughter was mechanical and instantaneous. The water-cooled Browning machine guns opened up, firing continuously until their barrels glowed red-hot. The 37mm canister rounds tore massive gaps in the advancing columns. The Japanese soldiers, displaying suicidal bravery, stepped over the bodies of the fallen and charged straight into the muzzle flashes, only to be cut down seconds later. There was no room for tactics against such overwhelming firepower at close range. Marine reports later stated that the targets were so numerous, gunners did not even need to aim. They simply swept their barrels back and forth at waist height. The noise was deafening, a continuous roar of automatic weapons, exploding tanks, and the screams of the dying, all taking place under the ghostly light of the flares. By dawn, the shooting faded into silence. When the sun rose on July 25th, the scene facing the Marines was horrific. In front of just one company's position, over 1,200 Japanese bodies were counted. The piles of the dead were so high, they actually obstructed the field of fire for the gunners. In reality, the battle for Tinian ended right there. Although the official records say it took another 8 days to fully secure the island, Ogata's fighting force had been effectively erased in those 6 hours. He had lost his best officers, his communication structure, and his most aggressive battalions. The 5,000 or so survivors were scattered, leaderless, and broken. They were no longer an army, they were targets. Ogata's mistake was betting everything on a single hand, and the price was the collapse of his entire defense. From day 2 to day 9, the operation shifted from a battle to a hunt. The Americans did not rush. They introduced a terrifying new weapon to the Pacific theater: napalm. P-47 thunderbolts roared over the island, dropping belly tanks filled with jellied gasoline on the sugarcane fields and caves where the remnants of the Japanese army hid. Napalm did not just burn, it sucked the oxygen out of the air. The cane fields exploded into liquid fire, incinerating any final attempts at resistance. On August 1st, the island was declared secure. Colonel Ogata likely took his own life around this time, or was killed in a final, feeble charge. The final tally was a study in asymmetry. Nearly 9,000 Japanese soldiers were dead. The Americans lost roughly 300 men. It was a kill ratio of nearly 30-1. But those numbers do not tell the whole story. They reveal the cruelty of a tactical error. Those 9,000 men did not die fighting a 9-day battle. The vast majority were destroyed in a single night because they were tricked into charging into the teeth of the American defense. However, the story of Tinian does not end when the guns went silent. In fact, the most impressive chapter of the island's history was just beginning. Before the smoke had even cleared, the Navy's Seabees, the construction battalions, moved in. Their task was monumental. They had to turn this coral rock into the world's largest airbase, and they had to do it yesterday. The statistics of their work are staggering. In a matter of weeks, the Seabees moved 12 million cubic yards of earth and coral. To put that in perspective, that is a volume of earth equivalent to 3 Great Pyramids of Giza. They worked 24 hours a day under floodlights, often while Japanese snipers were still taking pot shots from the jungle edges. They leveled mountains. They filled valleys. They ground the coral into a natural concrete that was harder than asphalt. The result was North Field, a sprawling complex of 4 massive runways, each 8,500 feet long. By 1945, Tinian was the busiest airport on the planet, with B-29s taking off every minute, round the clock, carrying fire to the Japanese mainland. And at a quiet hardstand on the northern tip of the island, history turned a page. In August 1945, a B-29 named Enola Gay revved its engines and lifted off from this very coral runway, carrying a single bomb, Little Boy. Hours later, Hiroshima vanished. 3 days later, another bomber, Boxcar, took off from Tinian carrying Fat Man to Nagasaki. The Japanese soldiers who died on Tinian fought to hold the ground, never knowing that their swift defeat would turn their island into the threshold of the atomic age. They believed they were the shield of the emperor, but their destruction allowed the sword of the apocalypse to be drawn. The Battle of Tinian remains a brutal lesson in modern warfare. It proves that courage alone cannot defeat intelligence, engineering, and superior firepower. General Smith's deception won the battle before the first shot was fired. The engineering genius of the Doodlebug ramps solved the impossible geography. And Colonel Ogata's single miscalculation sent nearly 9,000 men to their deaths in the blink of an eye. Military history is not always written in long campaigns. Sometimes the distance between survival and total annihilation is measured in just 6 hours. Thank you for watching Fireline. What do you think of the American feint tactic? Did Colonel Ogata have any other choice, or was his defeat inevitable against such engineering might? Let us know in the comments below. Do not forget to like and subscribe to join us as we uncover the hidden turning points of history.